Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for giving us this opportunity to get on the line and make this presentation to you guys. My name is Noah. I'm here with Dan, and we are going to talk to you about, I think Dan and me, we were discussing this before we came into this presentation, that, there's a hugely clever bunch of people sat across in North America, and we have to use big words. So the working title of our presentation is Towards a Humanist Counterpoint to Big Data. And I'm the guy with the receding hairline, and Dan's got a little bit of a hipster mustache, so that's who we are. And now, what we wanted to do in this presentation, the way we want to set our stall out, is at North Star, we have a particular worldview in how we regard the respondent. We like to call it the respondent evolution. We see the respondent having evolved over time. And I'm going to hand you over to Dan to talk us through the first two stages of the respondent evolution.
Perfect. Thanks, Noah. So the first stage of the respondent evolution, as we like to see it, is respondents essentially as voices. So looking back at the work that we've been doing over the past 15 years, we're in no doubt that respondents in our business were initially conceptualized as voices. It was sufficient for researchers to simply include respondents in the process. The respondents were happy to be given the opportunity to be heard, and of course to be paid for it. And clients were content for those voices to be interpreted and relayed back into their boardrooms. In this context, respondents were really just passive voices, usually sitting behind one-way mirrors in focus group settings and answering volleys of predetermined questions and lines of thinking. They were seen as, research commodities rather than people sometimes. To clients and marketers, respondents were seen, as a head in need of shampoo or a foot in need of a sneaker. So it's clear at this stage of the respondent evolution that amplification was the name of the game. We amplified not only what we heard in research facilities, but also by intercepting them on streets, by calling them on the phone, and sometimes even knocking on their doors. Now, that takes us to stage two of the respondent evolution, respondents as actors. Around 10 years ago, we started to notice things changing. And this was in part driven by our clients' desire to get closer to the customer journey and the buying or usage moment. Now, we had to rework our qualitative design to accommodate the respondent in their own environment, essentially as an actor in their own life. So we had cameras follow respondents into car parks, into shopping malls, into supermarkets. It was no longer sufficient for respondents to simply be given a voice. As researchers, we had to make concepts demonstrable, and ethnography, or a more commercialized version of ethnography, became a shorthand for this demonstration. However, respondents were still passive in the research process. They're still just simply, actors to be observed, examined, and inferred from. We as researchers still felt like we were on the outside looking in. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Noah to talk about the changes that have taken place in society and how we've moved on to stage three of the respondent evolution.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, as Dan talked you through stage 1 and 2, we pause for breath here. I think what we want to pick up on in this slide is simply that, and something that we've talked about in other forums, and I'm sure you've heard of it in other forums as well, that there's been a huge shift brought about by technology. This shift has been around how people engage with friends, institutions, and brands. The use and adoption of technology, in our view, has had two fallouts on the industry. First and foremost, it has helped us reach out to respondents in many different ways, the physical manifestation, email, mobile, online apps, etc. However, at North Star, we've begun to consider the impact it has on the mind and the general outlook of our respondents. In other words, the impact of a confessional culture. Our next slide is a man in underpants. But I think it's relevant because the point that we want to make here is that respondents are continuously providing information about their lives, hopes, and joys. Sometimes too much information, but that's okay. This means that they are active by default, and we feel that we need to tap into this force. We think that one of the major effects of this active setting, if we call it that, is that people expect an open discussion, getting access to the full picture, and a certain immediacy of response. We felt that this could be the starting point of making the respondent an agent in the research process, removing the barrier, somebody who we could work with to record, refine, and report. In other words, a respondent reimagined. This brings us to the third stage of the respondent evolution, where we treat the respondent as an agent. So how do you reimagine the respondent? We did this in close collaboration with anthropologists at the London School of Economics. This was validated by their deep and extensive fieldwork experience across diverse cultures. They said an honest understanding of reality was best derived from a context that allows for respondent agency. We define respondent agency as the ability to operate alongside the researcher, with the researcher investing with complete transparency and relevant skills in return for authentic access. In other words, we need help from our friends, but more importantly, there is a shift in the relationship that we have historically had with respondents. But this is just theory. We needed to put this into practice. So before we started working with Delta, we realized that reimagining the respondent is not a theoretical exercise. We built and tested a study design. First step was convincing ourselves that less control was better. The next was to reassure the client that this was a calculated risk. We created a global prototype, not a one market, one pony card trick, a study across 5 diverse markets that required respondents to work as peers. We took away the one-way mirror and secrecy of purpose. We put in hours of training and sensitization on how to gather, collect, and analyze information. The results were positive. The clients were happy. We got an industry award for the work that we did for this not-for-profit. Most importantly, we got the confidence to repeat and refine our approach that we put into practice in a test scenario with a not-for-profit for Delta Airlines. Dan will tell you about how this approach was put into practice for Delta Airlines.
Perfect. Thanks, Noah. So let me just take you guys through the background and context of the study. So Delta Airlines were facing the typical challenge of a generational shift amongst their existing high-value frequent flyers. Now, these people typically came from the baby boomer generation and not only defined luxury airline consumption, but also represented the greatest proportion of revenue for the airline. But Delta rightly identified and anticipated that this momentum was going to shift and that millennial consumers would pose a completely different set of engagement and marketing challenges. Now, the challenge for us at North Star was to help the airline understand the authentic lifestyle, behavior, and attitudes of these people, as well as the impact on their business proposition. But keeping with the idea of working with respondents as agents in the insight process, we decided that consumer workshops were not enough on their own to get the level of depth and authenticity that we wanted. So we developed and employed what we like to call self-curated peer sessions. Now, we like to imagine typical workshops and these self-curated peer sessions as 2 interdependent segments of a journey. And in the latter, the role of the respondent changes and becomes more dynamic and involved. As you can see from the map that we have up here, we conducted a combination of workshops and peer sessions in some of Delta's strategic markets across the globe, the UK, Brazil, and China. But let me be very clear here. These self-curated peer sessions, we're not just talking about simple friendship groups here. That's been done before. We're all familiar with the benefits. They're to help encourage a more natural, comfortable, and candid environment for participants to share their opinions. And of course, doing research with friends is clearly more fun and engaging. But with these self-curated peer sessions, we're trying to do something different. I want to demonstrate the potential that can be unlocked by breaking down the traditional barriers between researcher and respondent. The key premise of these peer sessions is to emulate our modern reality, the ways that people are already communicating and sharing with each other in their everyday lives. An open and honest and transparent dialogue with brands. So, by removing the one-way mirror, optically relinquishing a bit of the control, treating respondents as collaborators, and removing the research hierarchies that are so typical of our industry, We're able to empower our respondents and achieve a research version of this confessional culture that Noah talked about earlier. And in turn, we're getting a deeper level of insight. But how does this actually work? How do we do this? Well, we started by cherry-picking respondents from the initial workshop phase who would act as the lead respondent in their own peer session. And they were tasked with finding friends or peers who are like themselves. In this case, or Delta's case, having friends with a comparable travel background. But then it's time to bring them in. And a major part of this was being very direct with them about the business objectives. There's no secrecy or insulting their intelligence. We're pulling them in to help, work with us. We then needed to ensure that they could also steer the conversations in the way that we needed. So we spent time up front with them, investing in them relevant skills, taking them through the basics of moderation, and obviously the objectives and aims of the study. It's all about arming our respondents with the tools needed to help be collaborative agents. Now, the lead respondent then facilitated the discussions with the help of the researcher and the client in the background in order to guide the conversations into rich and rewarding areas of exploration. One thing that we noticed is that, as researchers, qualitative researchers, we have to stay objective and not really influence the discussion. And for that reason, we can't really give any of ourselves away to the conversation, but our lead respondent can, and this encourages a more reciprocal relationship. So whilst an interview dynamic has an inherent hierarchy, this self-curated peer session amongst friends encourages mutual sharing. Then, that's not it. When the peer sessions are over, the lead respondent also stayed involved for the analysis. We invited them back to help us understand their view on what was said, what wasn't said, and in turn, we learned a lot about what the lead respondent considered to be the main findings of the research. Why simply interpret when we can also authenticate? One last point of note is our choice of location. As you can see here from the picture, we strive for the most culturally relevant and open environment to host these discussions. For example, we used an eclectic private members club in London and a traditional tea house in Shanghai. But I've talked a lot about the methodology, but what were the actual business benefits and implications? Well, firstly, we found out that these self-curated peer sessions were incredibly exploratory in nature. They opened up discussion areas that we as researchers and Delta as a business had not anticipated or even felt comfortable exploring in the first place. Secondly, they were truly authentic. The friends acted as filters because people who know and trust each other can have a genuine and open conversation. To stick with the saying, friends keep it real. Lastly, they're incredibly contextual. We're able to get a better handle on the social context that shapes and influences the travel experience, especially for leisure flights amongst friends. And overall, we're not saying that this is a proxy for a focus group or a workshop. Rather, we're just telling you that it's another method for breaking down barriers, encouraging transparency, and giving our respondents more agency and ownership of the research process, which is emulative of today's culture, and we feel is a great starting point for reimagining the respondent.
So that was a quick whistle-stop tour of how we look at the respondent evolution from the voice actor to agent. In reimagining the respondent, we have to be cognizant that this may not be the final stage of the respondent evolution, and we should be open to a more disruptive collaborator. Perhaps the respondent is an insurgent, not simply a predictable and deterministic creature created out of a multiplicity of data feeds. Today, in our business, the significant analytical narrative in most of the organizations that we work with is centered around the examination of data collected through a diversity of touchpoints and devices. Our approach has thrown up solutions and options that were not apparent or obvious by our other forms of analysis. We are suggesting our clients take help from their friends. We are encouraging our clients to invest in people power. Thank you.